Hello and welcome to Read with Pride, a podcast focused on LGBTQIA+ literature brought to you by the Ocean County Library's Ocean Pride Committee.
Hello and welcome to another very exciting edition of Read with Pride. As always, my name is Frank. I use he and they pronouns, and I am here with my intrepid co-host,
Lexi, and I use she, her pronouns.
And today we are joined by one of my favorite people in the entire Ocean County Library organization, my dear friend and co-conspirator in reading gay books right now, Bliss.
Hi, I'm Bliss, and I use they, them pronouns.
Yay! Today we are talking about queer retellings. Now, in the canon of literature, I do think it's very easy to say, especially if you're listening to this podcast, you probably think there have been queer stories for as long as there have been stories. But we have not always been as lucky to enjoy an era where we could publish things that are explicitly queer and just have that be the text. So there's been a lot of interest, especially in, I think, recent years as more and more things enter public domain, to do retellings that take some of the queer subtext and just make it text.
Yeah.
Today we're talking about The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, and comparing it to My Dear Henry by Kalynn Bayron, which is part of the young adult series Classics Remixed, which is a wonderful series of books, all by different YA authors taking on different classic pieces of literature and updating them to be more queer, diverse,
modern.
Yeah. I don't know about modern
topics.
To bringing modern conversations to classic stories.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of my favorite little series that has been coming out for as long as I've worked in teen services, so I was really excited that we were doing this episode. And because we needed to really understand where is this remix coming from, we've also read the original Jekyll and Hyde, which I didn't know had so much subtext going into it.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like I was the only one who didn't know.
I also didn't know that the story was going to be... I don't know if it was written with any intentional queer subtext. I don't really know anything about the author, but I know reading the original immediately, I was like, oh yes, I see how this ended up in the Classics Remixed collection.
Yeah. Say more about that, please.
I think the main theme with the concept of Jekyll and Hyde, that like duality of man, and the idea that there is a part of you that you have to keep separate from the respectable facade of the rest of you, can be read as queer in a number of different ways because of how long queerness has been relegated to like nightlife, like figuratively and metaphorically.
That makes an immense amount of sense. I think that there's always been an interest in looking at the duality of mankind. I blame Descartes for this. We don't have time to get into all of that. Or even if you look at like the Jungian self and shadow self, that there's you, and then there's the part of you that exists in your subconscious, that's repressed, that's all of your ill intentions. Mm-hmm. And Jekyll and Hyde really said, what if we took all of the icky parts and we just pushed them over there?
Mm-hmm. But that then begs the question of what are the icky parts?
Why are they icky?
Right.
In the case of the original Jekyll and Hyde, Hyde was much more like violent.
Yes.
And much less caring. Whereas in My Dear Henry, it was more about the parts of Jekyll that were not socially acceptable and holding him back in his father's eyes anyway, from being successful in the future.
It was there was very softer. It was much softer to me in the remix than the original, because as we kind of just said too, in the original, Mr. Hyde was nasty. He was totally characterized as a horrible fellow who people, were scared of or they hated. He was nasty. It was interesting. Yeah,
there was the line of, like, if ever I have seen the signature of Satan upon a man's face, it was this fellow.
Which, that's
what a line.
Pretty heavy-handed. Yeah, like, okay. And in My Dear Henry, which I do think, and I would like your opinions on, was geared towards a younger YA audience, to make it more relevant. What did you guys think about the remix being centered on YA characters and towards that audience?
I think this being a YA story made a huge difference, and actually a lot more difference in how the plot had to play out than the book being about queer characters or even black characters, which the Classics remix adaptation does speak quite openly about racism in, like, Victorian British society as well. But because these were teenage characters, albeit late teenagers, in a time when, like, late teenagers would have a lot more freedom to move about the world on their own, there was the necessary involvement of family and adults in their lives in a way that they would not have had as much influence if these were adult characters.
I absolutely agree. And speaking from, like, a teen services background, I do think if you are making a book for teens, it needs to focus on younger characters, because even though there are tons of books that have crossover appeal between young adults and adult fiction, it is very important for teens to read stories about themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
I agree, and I think it's very specifically, I think it is important for teens to see stories about how adults and authority figures in their life. Like, I think it's important for them to see those themes in those stories, because it is such a huge part of being a minor.
I was going to say, I think it's really interesting that you brought that up, because I felt like that was kind of gender bent a little bit, because I'm so used to reading Victorian novels about young ladies who are chaperoned, who have governesses, who are watched very carefully in society. And I'm very unfamiliar with that same concept being applied to males in traditional Victorian literature. Whereas in My Dear Henry, it very much was emphasized that they were very much watched and chaperoned, from school to parents to bosses, mentors. It was something that was very prominent.
And I wonder if it would have been half as prominent if Henry and Gabriel weren't black.
Yeah.
Or queer.
Or queer. I found that the discussion of blackness in My Dear Henry in Victorian England, I thought was really fascinating, because we talk a lot in literature, I think in, like, American literature and American black literature, about what it was like after the Civil War and the Reconstructionist South, the Civil Rights Movement. There's a lot of conversation about what being black in America was like. We have a character in the very beginning of My Dear Henry talking about how he viewed Gabriel's father as something akin to a family pet or a prized racehorse.
Oh, that was the first thing of many things in this book that made me so, like, viscerally angry to read.
And there's this kind of paternalism that I wasn't surprised by so much as, I think, by virtue of, like, my own whiteness, I simply did not think about the British experience of racism. And it was so key to how Henry Jekyll Jr. was treated, how Henry Jekyll's father was treated as a doctor of their medical school, but also being forced forced to teach in the grossest basement in the worst operating theater, was the first person to be accused of theft from the medical school, and being quite clearly punished for demanding to be treated as an equal by the medical school.
And it really ended up being, in many ways, the racism of society ended up being a driving force for the queer phobia from the parents of Gabriel and Henry.
Yes.
It was this consistent theme of, we have to hold ourselves to like the most proper standard, because as Black people in this society, no one is ever going to give us anything unless we are impeccable.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that if they were both white, how do you think they would have been treated? What do you think there would have been a difference in how society, not just family, viewed them?
It's hard to say, because I don't know as much about how, like, society operated back then, but perhaps white boys might have been given a little more of, like, you gotta hush that down, as opposed to, like, this is unacceptable and you've been expelled from school.
And I have to say that, like, I honestly think if they were both white, it very much would have been like a boys will be boys, or like that's a college, frat kind of thing.
We've all done that.
Yeah.
And they were roommates.
And they'll grow out
like
of
there's
it.
part of like the boys' house or whatever, the frat. Because when Henry is being like expelled, or it's being talked about, he said something to the effect of like, I know every man in this room has committed sins of morality. And it made me question, like, that's kind of relevant to this, because obviously you think, like, oh, they've done other things, but, like, I wonder if there was a nod to queerness in that.
Well, one of the things that this is making me think of is another book in the Classics Remixed series, Most Ardently, which is a Pride and Prejudice remake, I want to say.
I do believe that's true.
Yes. I always forget. We don't need to. Anyway, where it is a trans mask story, and Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet ends up being Darcy and Oliver Bennet. And they have chances to, like, go out to a Molly house, which was the kind of Victorian equivalent of a gay club, or speakeasy, or gentleman's club, but not gentleman's club in the way that we think of it now. And they were not able to be openly romantic in the way that we would be able to have a romantic gay relationship out now, but the two of them kind of sneaking around and spending a bunch of time with each other was just a boys being, very much so was a boys being boys, whereas so much of My Dear Henry focused on respectability politics and the idea that they needed to be morally inscrutable, and anything against that was not just a mark against them, but this deep moral shame that they could not, or at least that Henry felt because of the shame from his father, that he could not live while feeling this shame. When, just switching a little bit back to original Jekyll and Hyde, there's very clearly the sense of like duality and the good and the bad. Where did you feel the queer subtext the most strongly? Because I didn't get a strong overture of homoeroticism from the relationship between Utterson and Jekyll in the original text.
I would agree with that. I don't feel like that relationship specifically was necessarily in the subtext. I think the theme of like the whole, central theme of Jekyll and Hyde and like having a part of yourself you suppress was really what rang true in like a queer way for me.
I think when you are thinking about that, though, you need to think in terms of what it was like back then, where now it's very tame and maybe doesn't even come off as something more, but I think back then there was enough subtext to where people kind of got it as like a wink wink kind of thing. So in Stevenson's, the original author's writings, a lot of his work has homoerotic or even I would say homosexual vibes to it. So like, yeah, so like while, and honestly, the author was married to a woman, did not explicitly say he was gay. We all know that's whatever. But his work has been the subject of scholarly debate since they were published for being queer, for being homoerotic.
I did not know this. That's very exciting.
Yes.
And makes me want to go read more of it.
You should. It's really interesting. You should look at some of the letters that his good friend wrote to him and how he describes Stevenson.
His good buddy?
Yeah.
His great platonic pal?
You know, maybe he was a high school roommate, you know, who knows?
Just guys
college,
being dudes.
You know? Yeah. So I think it's not as obvious to us now, but I do think people back then would have picked up on it. But yeah, his other stuff is interesting and yeah, the long history of being debated.
Yeah. I will say one thing that I found very clear in the original text was that the more you live as yourself, or in this case, the more that Hyde got to come out, the harder it is to be anyone else. That once I started thinking of myself as like trans, I couldn't put that toothpaste back in the tube.
I very much had a similar experience.
I'm like, oh no, this is what it's like to live comfortably. Beans.
Yep, you start to feel how freeing it is to just get to like be yourself even a little bit. It's so hard to ever want to go back.
Moving along to My Dear Henry, when Bliss and I had talked very briefly last week before we recorded, and I had said that I hadn't started the book yet, and Bliss said, oh, you're gonna be so angry. And I was like, oh, yeah, there's the racism, right? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, and there's gonna be some queerphobia, right? And they were like, oh, yeah. And there's gonna be some sexism, right? And they said, yeah. But I didn't get it. The thing that truly made me the most furious as I was reading this book was the fact that My Dear Henry is very much so a story about conversion therapy. I don't have a better way to put it. In My Dear Henry, we have Dr. Jekyll Sr., who, after being kicked out of teaching at the London College of Medicine, devotes a bunch of his time to creating a course of treatment for his son to excise the undesirable parts of him, which is to say, trying to cut out his affections for Gabriel. And that results in the splitting of his psyche and the creation of a deeply haunted and hollow version of Henry and the creation of Hyde. Hyde in My Dear Henry is not this distillation of all that is evil, but much rather Henry's desire to live, of someone who loves dancing and loves Gabriel and has this great zest for life and care for others that is seen by Dr. Jekyll Sr. as this great threat to his family and his son, and will do anything to permanently get rid of him. And that was heartbreaking for me.
I very much agree, and that theme of like conversion therapy adjacent stuff starts earlier in the book as well, in a conversation that Gabriel has with the professor who ends up replacing Dr. Jekyll at the college before Gabriel is expelled. There is a passage early on where Professor Kingston points out to Gabriel that he and Henry, or specifically Gabriel in relation to his feelings about Henry, is not being particularly subtle. And he implores him to figure out how to lie better. To the point of, and it's very much implied that this is something that was done for Professor Kingston and something he credits to his own success, that perhaps he had a boy he was romantically involved with when he was younger, and a professor said to him, "You're never going to get anywhere unless you can put this away." And it is the most... Honestly, that part broke my heart a lot more than everything going on with Dr. Jekyll. I think because in this case it was coming from someone who had experienced it and who knew how much it hurt, but also fully believed it was necessary. To the point of terrorizing a teenage boy about it.
Yeah.
No, I think we all just need to sit with that for a
Yup,
second.
good stuff.
One of the things that I found really interesting with the relationship between Gabriel and Henry is that at no point was Gabriel feeling ashamed of how he felt. That he looked upon his dear Henry with love, and then as the story progressed and there was the hint of like romance, or not even a hint, but that like after some time had passed that Lanyon, is that how you pronounce?
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah, that there was some sort of budding romance between Gabriel and Lanyon, and Henry saw it and was like, you guys can't do that.
Yeah.
How are you not disgusted with yourself? And Gabriel responds by just being like, this is just who I am. Why would I be ashamed?
I will say, to a point, Gabriel's, like, I don't know, optimism, innocence, the way in which it just never seemed to occur to him that there would be homophobia happening did take me out of it a little bit, because I feel like at a certain point it would have been like, okay, I get it. Like, I agree, you should get to be yourself, but also, especially as, you know, a black man growing up in Victorian England, I feel like you would have the knowledge that just because something should be a way doesn't mean it is.
Yeah.
And it
He's
doesn't
also
mean
a
it's...
teenager.
That's
like, he's young. He doesn't have... Like, I understand what you're saying, because I'm also with you guys. But, like, he doesn't have the life experience that an adult would have, where you're, like, crushed over and over and over again by society.
No.
You still have the will to live, you know?
I guess so. And I don't read a lot of YA.
I do think this character is prevalent. Like, I do think there is that, like...
This is a very common thing in YA, where I think it's important for YA books, especially ones talking about big topics like racism, queerphobia, suicidality, to make sure that you have a character who always believes living is worth it.
Yeah,
and that is a thing that is important for YA books, even though that is not always the case, especially in life.
Yeah, no, you're right. As I was talking, I realized what I was missing here. There are some things I did not love about this book that were almost all directly related to it being a YA book, but I don't think that is really a mark against the book itself. It's just a matter of my taste.
But I also think it's good to have a representation for kids of all backgrounds. Like,
Oh,
there
yes.
probably are kids that are sheltered or who don't, like, fully realize, like, the bigger picture of things. But I think you're right. Like, this book was very YA. Like, if you're not a YA reader, I could see how this would be like I see some things here. But it is very formulaic for YA readers.
So this actually brings me to a question that I had, which is, do you feel like this was a faithful adaptation of the source text?
I feel like it was as faithful as it could be, while also being a YA novel, which I actually, like I said earlier, I think has much more to do with any deviation from the original story than topics of queerness or racism.
I don't think it's... my answer is going to be no. I
Why?
don't think... Because
I love disagreement. Let's go.
Because I don't think that it related closely enough to the original to be truly a remix. Like, I think it went a little further beyond just a retelling. I mean, it just... The vibe was different, the background character... Like, it was too different for me.
It was too different for you?
It certainly gave a lot more... background context, like the whole before portion of the book.
I loved
it.
Same, and that's something we don't really have a lot of in the original. So
pretty
like,
much none of that.
Felt more fleshed out, or more like there was more of a life to them. It wasn't as one-dimensional. So like, I don't know. For me, it was just a little bit too left of the original.
Okay, and then do you feel like it was a worthwhile expansion of the text? Which I think is different from being a faithful adaptation.
I think it was a worthwhile, different book. Like, I think it was worthwhile to read on its own. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't necessarily even pair it with the original. Like, you could read this on its own.
I honestly disagree in that I don't think I would have enjoyed this half as much if I wasn't able to catch all of the references to the original, even... like small stuff like the butler, Mr. Poole, and the poker, the fireplace poker that he was instructed to use as a weapon, and like little things like that where I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. But I also read the original and then immediately read this. Yeah. So I know you had read it in the past and just kind of refreshed yourself.
Yes. So I originally read this when I was in college a million years ago in my gender and sexuality class. We actually discussed this and we're talking about it. And that was in relation to Frankenstein, which I think is super gay.
We can do that next time.
I would love to do that. I love Frankenstein.
I've been meaning to read Frankenstein for like 15 years.
Yeah, you should.
You're Frank.
But so I read this in the past in my gender and sexuality class, talking about Victorian literature. And I did a quick refresh of reading it before this and before My Dear Henry. And I gotta say, I don't think I needed it. I think I would have... Honestly, though, I'm not really a fan of the original text, so that might have influenced me. But I think I would have much rather read My Dear Henry on its own, and then if I felt like it afterwards, maybe revisited the original. But I think I would have preferred this just as its own thing, its own entity.
So I am unsure if I have read the original before, because I have vague memories of buying a very funky illustrated edition from a Scholastic book fair in late elementary school.
That was extremely likely to be abridged even if you had read it.
Yeah.
No, full text, 3rd grade.
The full text is long-winded. Utterson loves to go on and on and on.
Sure does.
So I don't know if I definitely was familiar with the broad strokes of the story.
Yeah.
And then I read Jekyll and Hyde, and then I read My Dear Henry, and then I reread Jekyll and Hyde.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
I like making a little book sandwich.
Nice.
And what I definitely agree with Bliss in that if I had not read the source text, there are a lot of things that I think I would not have appreciated as much. For example, keeping the line, if he is Mr. Hyde, then I shall be Mr. C.
I love that line.
Literally, I have that written in my notes. I was going to bring that up. Listen, okay, I listened to the audiobook, and I laughed so hard to myself in my car, because I was like, that is the pun of the century. Like, he might be Mr. Hyde, but I am Mr. Seek. I was laughing so hard.
And the fact that it's in both.
Yeah.
I literally was going to read that.
I was so giddy when I read that in the original. I was like, this is the best line in the whole story.
It is, honestly, it's the best quote. It's one of the best quotes in literature, honestly.
Yeah. And the fact that was... I don't think I would have enjoyed it at all if I was like, this is just a modern invention to throw a pun in there.
Yeah.
But knowing...
I think I would have. That's interesting.
I think that knowing that this was a very clear tribute to the original.
Yeah.
I was like, people have always been people, and I love our stupid puns.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
I also think there are some, like, plot beats or devices that I would not have given as much leeway if it wasn't a tribute to the plot line of the classic. Like the fact that the butler of decades to the Jekyll family is now just like buds with this 17-year-old boy. Mm-hmm. That I accepted it because I was like, yes, Gabriel is the Utterson of the original, and like Mr. Poole is the butler, and this is also the only way it would make sense for this to happen. But like, that felt like a leap for me, and I was able to just be like, yeah, because that's how it goes. But I don't know if I read this book by itself, I'd be like, that's weird.
I think it's also a little bit more forgivable because of the time.
Yeah, that's
and
what
the
I was
fact
thinking.
that while we know that the letters from Gabriel to Henry passed through a few hands, that, you know, Henry's mother, who was very supportive.
Yeah, can we talk about that too?
Yeah, I'm going to finish the sentence, and then
please
we're going to
do.
go there, because otherwise I'm not going to get back to it. But we know that Gabriel's letters to Henry were passed through the mother, but the mother probably didn't receive the post, that was definitely house staff, so that the butler or the maid definitely saw, oh, Henry's getting a lot of mail from this kid, and they're going to medical school together. That there was definitely some sort of an understanding of the relationship between the young master and this kid off the street.
For me, it was more that there was just like an extent to which Mr. Poole confided in Gabriel, the admittedly like older teen, but still teenager, about this like clearly very strange situation happening in the household.
Yeah, no, I do think that is definitely something where I looked at it and I thought, well, this needs to happen for the story to happen.
Yes.
Now, going back to different levels of acceptance from parents.
Yes.
This is something that also comes up in Most Ardently, and I do think is very worth looking at the other classics remixed stories. I know that it would be inaccurate to say that people of a particular time felt any homogenous way.
Yeah, absolutely.
There were definitely people who were gay and bi and trans in Victorian England, and there were definitely people who were able to find community and people who were allies to that community at that time. I don't know if it just reflects poorly on me and my inability to believe in people, that whenever I see a really supportive a really supportive parent in one of these stories, I'm like,
That's not true.
this wouldn't have been that easy.
I don't know if I agree in this case. I think the like mama bear energy that Mrs. Jekyll comes in with at the end is a little contemporary, but I don't think her being supportive of Henry and disgusted with what Henry's father was doing to him is unrealistic.
Yeah.
I think, especially if we're operating on the assumption that, like, white boys might have been allowed they might have been advised to exercise more discretion, but allowed to just have their relationship as long as they kept it under the table enough. I think maybe Mrs. Jekyll might have stood more in that space. If, where she could probably see, like, why should we be held to different standards than, the white people of today?
Absolutely. And I think that part of my difficulty accepting her acceptance was also because we see so little of her. That she is very much so a complete invention of this adaptation.
Oh, yeah. I think the reason why it would be believable for me is because clearly this woman is open to, like, different lifestyles, different things. I mean, she married Dr. Jekyll, who is not, like, normal by any Victorian standard. So, and I think because of being Black, I think she is probably very aware of being othered. So,
and also being a woman.
And being a woman, being in that time period, I think that, yeah, it felt kind of real to me in the sense that, like, okay, she knows what it's like to be on the other side. Also, this is her child. And Dr. Jekyll is weird, doing his whatever things. So, like, that part felt a little more believable. I think it would have been more unbelievable if nobody was accepting at all, even a little bit. But I'm also a cynic like you, Frankie, and it is hard for me to believe, like, oh yeah, this person is, like, nice and kind-hearted about it. Yeah, go ahead.
I get where you're coming from, and I mean, I'm also, to be the cynic, this story gets wrapped up in, like, a nice, beautiful bow, and Jekyll and Hyde are recombined into the Henry Gabriel loved through the power of love, and it's like,
And they
to
go
me,
to
I'm
the
like,
countryside.
yeah, and then they go to the countryside together, and it's like, okay, all right. And that was the point at which I was like, I just have to accept that this is a YA book.
It's YA.
And especially because in the original, like, it ends with Jekyll committing suicide. I knew...
They weren't going to do that.
I knew they weren't going to do that. I didn't know how they were going to handle it, and I hoped it would be a little smoother than The Power of Love Saves All.
Yeah.
But, you know... maybe I gotta just rock with it.
But you know what?
Last
That's
time I was on this
exactly-
podcast too, I was also like, the ending of this book is too happy, and I don't believe it. So this might just be a me thing.
That's so funny. Oh my god. I see it too. Like, yeah, if something's too, like, wrapped up and hokey. But this, again, is why I feel like this book was a good standalone. Because the original book, so vastly separated with, like, yeah, you get a really, like, dark kind of thing where there's a death, a suicide. There is that ending in that direction, and this book went so opposite that if I was a teenager reading both of them, really, to me they wouldn't even really be related. Like, I just feel like they're so different that, like, they're like distant cousins. I can see the same family name, but it's like when you meet this person at a family reunion, you're like, how are you related to me? Who are you?
I see.
I will say I would love to read an adult adaptation that is similar, or I would also really love to see a Jekyll and Hyde adaptation that focuses on trans themes, either in addition to or instead of a gay relationship.
I would like to second the desire for a more, I guess, gender identity focused Jekyll
I
and
could have
Hyde.
so easily gone in that direction.
I do know that there has been a recent addition to this series called This Wretched Beauty that is focusing on the portrait of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. But we do not have that in the library at the time of recording, which is why we did not do that one. And so I am excited, just as an individual reader, to see where that goes. I think that a more transgender version of this story would also lend itself a little bit more to maybe not everything is wrapped up with the power of love, but starting their lives over somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That when we have in the original text, like, thus ends the unhappy life of Henry Jekyll, that
could then be, you know, thus begins the beautiful life of Miss Hyde.
of Miss Hyde, and, like, maybe you take a train to another country, or you go over to the sea to the New World, and you're in the big city.
I mean, they're like, is this London?
Yeah.
So, like, still, yeah. So, like, you go to France, you go to Paris, like, it's close.
I have a question going back to the actual book. Or even just the idea of queer retellings. What is the purpose of a retelling?
I don't think there needs to be one purpose. I think the, like, most obvious answer is to fill in the gaps of historical literature where, as you said in the introduction to the episode, we have always been there, but it has largely been subtext and interpretation. So subtextual that it would be easy for modern audiences not to see it.
A thing that I totally didn't do. No, I think that's an excellent point. And I also think it also brings the original back into the conversation.
Yes.
Where by having, like, we can talk about how, like, oh, this is just X is just a retelling of Y. Like, oh, The Lion King is just a retelling of Hamlet.
Mm-hmm.
How many people have picked up Hamlet because they heard that and wanted to know more?
Exactly.
I would love to know a number. I would love to know an exact number.
At least 3.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I think, because, I do think it's important, all of that stuff. And it does bring things back into the conversation. I think it breathes new life into something. I think it adds more to the story. I mean, it definitely brings more people to the audience. I mean, and representation is so important, as we all know. I think it definitely is something that is good to bring more people to the surface of that story.
I also think, like, let gay people have fun.
That might be too much. I don't know.
There doesn't need to be a purpose, I think. Mm-hmm. It is fun to retell our favorite stories.
Yeah.
What makes something a retelling and not fan fiction? And why is the answer being published by a major publishing house?
That is, yes.
Yeah. I really think retellings also are a great way to hook younger readers.
Absolutely.
The whole idea of a teenager is such a hot new concept in the history of humanity that it is really an interesting negotiation of, like, what is appropriate. And so when you think of a lot of classic literature, there will be incredibly, like, grisly and gory details of war that would make a lot more sense to, you know, a 17-year-old living in the 1800s when you were going off to war and it was fought in, like, very close quarters. Whereas now, that same story is not going to ring true for a lot of your standard 17-year-old Americans.
I don't know. Were you a reader of the Dear America stories? The diaries?
I was
Or
not,
the royal ones?
I read the royal ones.
Yeah.
The Princess? No, not the Princess Diaries.
No,
it was a different
it was
one.
the Royal Diaries.
The
And
Royal
there was,
Diaries,
like,
yeah.
So I don't know about you, but when I was 17, I knew what it was like to be a soldier in the Civil War.
Oh, did you? Did you, Lexi? Tell us all about it.
It was
I thought you were just that old.
I am that old. I was a teenager in 1864.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to bring it into the conversation that the YA department or reading genre has only been around since, what, the 2000s? Like, specifically? Maybe late 90s?
The late 90s.
But, like, especially in libraries, like, the YA teen department was a concept that is still not terribly old. Mm-hmm. A lot of times teens were lumped in with children.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Which is, I think, at a certain point, clearly not appropriate anymore, but it's also so difficult because teenagers all develop at such different rates depending on, like, their life experiences and their individual personality and their families and stuff like that. So, like, I'm so glad it's not my job to decide what is and is not appropriate to have in a teen department that spans all the way from, like, 13 to like 19.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the conversation a lot. It's like, what goes in there? Because,
where does middle grade start?
No, don't even start about tweens. Like, what age is that? I know that's a huge debate, too. But, yeah.
I will say I do love working with teens, very much so because of that variety and the fact that you can have a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old ask for exactly the same thing in completely different ways, and it is so interesting to see how everyone gets there. I think that the Classics Remixed series is doing a really good job of a very difficult task, which is in the era of, like, book talk and short-form video media saying, hey, here's why you should care about these old stories.
Yeah.
And maybe that brings you back to the old story. Maybe you just read the remix and you're like, wow, I knew the Nick and Gatsby wanted to kiss the whole time, and I was right. And then you bring that book to your friend, and then you get it to share. And then more people come to the library, and more people are reading, and that is a genuine social good.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It really does bring this back into relevance and makes it interesting to teenagers, which I know, at least for me, like when I was a teenager, I really wanted to read like my specific books that I was interested in, and if I didn't find something interesting, it was like I'm not going to read this. Mm-hmm. So this definitely brings it back into the conversation.
I get so many teens that say, I just want a good book.
Yeah.
And I'll say, okay, what do you mean? And they're like, just something that's well written. And I'll say, okay. What do you mean by this? Yeah. And a lot of the times then I'll get like, happy or sad? Do you want something that's a series or by itself? Do you want it to be in ye olden times or the future?
You have to conduct that reference interview.
The reference interview, reader's advisory is such an important skill. And a lot of the times I'll get people wanting something that's really like emotionally engaging, but maybe not stomp on your heart.
Yeah.
Or something that has an amount of historical something or other, but isn't magical. Mm-hmm. But the characters are relatable, and that's something where this really comes in handy because, yeah, there's a little bit of the science fiction of, like, the transformation, the weird fringes of science. There's a drug from this mountain that turns you into something else. But largely speaking, this is very grounded in reality and talks about history and, like, the boarding house and the medical college and different aspects of Victorian London. In the author's note on My Dear Henry, the author talks about how she did a lot of research about the experience of being Black in Victorian England, and there are a lot of nods within the story to actual events that happened or would have happened at the same time that the story is set, of, say, an innocent Black man who was caught up in not even an investigation, but just like a police chase, and was wrongly killed just for trying to run for his life. And this is something that you would definitely not get in the original Jekyll and Hyde, but was important for her to bring into the conversation for the reader to be like, oh, there is no point in the entire story where Henry and Gabriel are safe. And that adds a very interesting layer to the entire plot.
Absolutely. And something I wanted to bring up in this podcast is how well I thought the author of My Dear Henry did keeping those like historical elements and accuracies, and also making this like a compelling love story in the beginning without fully sacrificing the elements of horror that come from the original. I'm not really a horror reader or even like a horror movie person, but I think I might become one, honestly, from having read Jekyll and Hyde, because the like extent of just the like horrifying descriptions and the way the characters were like shaken to their core at the very sight of what was happening before them, I loved it.
So there's a thing that's frequently said that horror and romance and comedy are cousins. And it really, I think that horror is such a good way to tap into very visceral shared human experiences. And we've talked a lot about horror on this podcast. Yeah. Please see our wonderful episode about lesbian vampires. Yes. Truly, I think one of my favorite things that we've done. That there's especially so much room for queerness within horror.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I would love to take you more on this journey together.
Thank you, Frank.
All right. And with that, I don't think we're going to have a better way to wrap this up. So thank you so much for listening. And I don't know, check out Classics Remixed. Tell all parts of yourself that you love them. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to visit the Ocean County Library's website for more podcasts and events. All the titles mentioned in today's episode can be found throughout the Ocean County Library, free with your library card. Until next time, happy reading.